Captain Marcus Thompson stood frozen at the kitchen doorway, his duffel bag sliding from his shoulder to the floor with a soft thud. The scene before him shattered every dream he'd carried through 3 years of desert heat and sleepless nights on foreign soil. Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, stood on a wooden chair that wobbled dangerously with each movement. Her small frame was bent over a large aluminum basin filled with ice-cold water, her thin arms submerged to the elbows as she scrubbed dishes with methodical precision. The sight of her cracked, reddened hands made Marcus's chest tighten with a pain sharper than any battlefield wound. But what truly broke his heart was the weight on her back. 3-year-old Tommy, her baby brother, slept peacefully against her shoulder blades, his chubby arms wrapped around her neck. A makeshift sling of torn fabric kept him secure while Emma worked, her small body trembling under the dual burden of the dishes and her brother's weight. "Emma," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. The little girl startled, nearly losing her balance. She turned slowly, her wide blue eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and fear. Water dripped from her raw fingers onto the cracked linoleum floor. "Daddy," the word came out as barely a breath. "Is it really you?" Marcus crossed the kitchen in 3 quick strides, his boots echoing on the worn floor. Gently, he lifted Tommy from Emma's back, the toddler stirring slightly but remaining asleep. Then he helped Emma down from the chair, wrapping his large hands around her small waist. As he knelt to her eye level, Marcus noticed details that made his soul ache. Emma's clothes were too small, faded and patched. Her hair hung in tangled strands, uncombed and dull. But worst of all were her hands, not the soft, pink hands of a child, but the roughened, wounded hands of someone forced into labor far too young. "Daddy, I was just finishing the dishes," Emma said quickly, her voice carrying an undertone of panic. "Mama Sarah said they had to be perfect or Tommy wouldn't get dinner tonight. I'm almost done, I promise." The casual way she mentioned this threat made Marcus's vision blur with rage. His daughter had been conditioned to accept cruelty as normal, to shoulder responsibility that should never belong to a child. 3 days earlier, Marcus had been checking his gear at Forward Operating Base Liberty, preparing for what he thought would be a routine return home. As a decorated Army captain, he'd served his country with distinction in Afghanistan, leading reconnaissance missions through hostile territory and keeping his unit safe through countless dangerous operations. The weight of his service medals felt meaningless now compared to the weight of his daughter's suffering. Marcus Thompson, 34 years old, had joined the military young, driven by a sense of duty and the promise of a stable future for his family. He was a man of discipline and honor, someone his soldiers respected and his enemies feared. His weathered face bore the lines of command decisions and desert sun, while his strong hands had held both weapons and wounded comrades. But beneath the soldier's exterior beat the heart of a devoted father. Every photo in his wallet showed Emma, her first steps, her birthday parties, quiet moments reading bedtime stories. During the darkest nights overseas, when mortar fire lit the sky and sleep was impossible, those images had kept him sane. The memory that haunted him most was from 3 years ago, when he'd last held his children. Emma had been 4 then, a bright, laughing child who called him her hero. Tommy was just a baby, gurgling contentedly in his arms. Sarah, his new wife, had seemed like salvation, a woman who'd promised to love his children as her own while he served overseas. How wrong he'd been. Now, as he held Emma's damaged hands in his, Marcus remembered every phone call home that had felt strained, every letter that never came, every time Sarah had made excuses when he'd asked to speak with the children. His instincts as a soldier had been screaming warnings, but he'd ignored them, trusting the woman he'd married. Emma Rebecca Thompson had once been the light of her father's life. At 7 years old, she possessed an intelligence that shone through her weariness, and a strength that broke Marcus's heart. Her blonde hair, though now matted and unkempt, still caught the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the grimy kitchen window. The little girl who once danced to music and painted colorful pictures had been transformed into a miniature caretaker, carrying burdens no child should know. Emma had learned to read Sarah's moods like a survival guide, knowing when to make herself invisible and when her brother needed protection. "Daddy," Emma whispered, leaning against his chest, "I tried to take care of Tommy like you asked, but sometimes I'm not strong enough." Marcus wrapped his arms around both children, feeling Tommy's warm breath against his neck as the toddler began to wake. "You did more than anyone should ever ask of you, sweetheart. But you're just a little girl. Taking care of Tommy wasn't your job." Emma pulled back to look at him, her young face etched with worry beyond her years. "But Mama Sarah said, if I didn't help, social services would come and take us away from each other. She said you didn't send enough money for food, so we had to be very good and not eat too much." The lies cut through Marcus like shrapnel. He sent more than enough money each month, enough to support 3 families, let alone 2 small children and 1 adult. Where had it gone? Tommy finally woke up, rubbing his eyes with tiny fists. When he saw Marcus, confusion crossed his features. This man was familiar from photographs, but 3 years was a lifetime in a toddler's world. "This is Daddy," Emma explained gently, her voice taking on the patient tone of someone far older. "Remember, from the pictures?" Tommy studied Marcus with solemn brown eyes, then slowly reached out to touch his father's face. "Daddy?" he whispered, the word uncertain but hopeful. Marcus felt tears threaten as he gathered both children closer. "Yes, buddy, Daddy's home, and I'm never leaving you again." As Marcus held his children in the shabby kitchen, his mind drifted to the last perfect day they'd shared. It was a Saturday morning in spring, 3.5 years ago. Emma had bounced into his bedroom at dawn, her pajamas twisted from sleep, demanding pancakes and cartoons. He'd carried her to the kitchen while baby Tommy gurgled in his high chair, and they'd made a magnificent mess together. Flour handprints on the cabinet doors, syrup dripping from the counter, Emma giggling as she flipped a pancake that landed on the floor instead of the pan. "Daddy, you're supposed to catch it," she'd laughed, covering her mouth with sticky fingers. That afternoon, they'd gone to Miller's Park. Marcus had pushed Emma on the swings while Tommy napped in his stroller, her delighted squeals mixing with bird songs and the distant laughter of other families. She'd worn a yellow dress with daisies on it, her hair in pigtails that bounced with each swing. "Higher, Daddy, I want to touch the clouds." He'd pushed her higher, watching her small hands grip the chains with determination. When she'd jumped off at the peak of her swing, landing in the soft grass with arms spread wide, Marcus had felt a pride deeper than any military achievement. "I'm flying, Daddy! Look, I'm flying!" That evening, they'd built a blanket fort in the living room, reading fairy tales by flashlight while Tommy crawled around exploring every corner. Emma had fallen asleep against his chest during the 3rd story, her thumb in her mouth and her other hand clutching his shirt. The memory felt like another lifetime now. Where was that confident, joyful little girl who'd believed she could fly? The decision to remarry and redeploy had seemed logical at the time. Marcus's first wife, Jennifer, had died in a car accident when Tommy was only 6 months old. Emma was struggling with the loss of her mother, and Marcus was facing the impossible task of single parenthood while maintaining his military career. Sarah Mitchell had seemed like an angel sent to answer his prayers. She was Jennifer's cousin, someone the family knew and trusted. She'd helped with the children during Jennifer's funeral, stepping in naturally when Marcus was overwhelmed by grief and logistics. "I love them already," she'd told him one evening, as they watched Emma color quietly at the kitchen table. Jennifer would want someone to love her babies like a mother should. Sarah was attractive, competent, and seemed genuinely fond of the children. When Marcus's unit received deployment orders to Afghanistan, remarrying felt like the responsible choice. Emma and Tommy would have a stable home, a mother figure, and the military family support system while he served overseas. The wedding was small, held in the base chapel 2 weeks before his deployment. Emma had worn a pink dress and scattered flower petals down the aisle, beaming with excitement about having a new mommy. Tommy, barely walking, had toddled between the pews while Sarah scooped him up with apparent affection. "I'll take such good care of them," Sarah had promised in her wedding vows. "They'll want for nothing while you're protecting our freedom." Marcus had believed every word. The deployment benefits would provide substantial monthly payments for family support. Sarah would receive military spouse benefits and base privileges. The children would have health care, housing allowances, and access to military family services. What could go wrong? The first signs of trouble were subtle. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. When Marcus tried to video chat with the children, Sarah always had excuses. They were napping, at a friend's house, too shy to talk on camera. They're adjusting to military life, she'd explain with a patient smile. Children process separation differently. I think it's better not to upset them by reminding them you're gone. The logic seemed reasonable to a man fighting in a war zone, desperately wanting to believe his children were safe and happy. Marcus focused on his missions, trusting Sarah's judgment while compartmentalizing his worry. Letters from home became less personal. Instead of Emma's crayon drawings and Tommy's handprints, there were typed updates about school events and doctor visits. Always positive, always vague. When Marcus sent care packages, thank you notes came back in Sarah's handwriting, claiming the children were too busy playing with their gifts to write themselves. The money kept flowing from Marcus's accounts: base pay, combat pay, family separation allowance, and additional hazard pay. More than enough to provide a comfortable middle-class lifestyle for a family of 3. Sarah sent photos occasionally, showing the children in what looked like nice clothes, playing in a clean house. But a father's intuition is powerful. Something felt wrong in those photos. Emma's smile seemed forced. Tommy looked thinner than he should. The backgrounds were always carefully cropped, never showing enough context to tell the real story. Marcus's fellow soldiers began to notice his distraction during the 3rd year of deployment. "Everything okay at home, Cap?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked after Marcus had stared at his phone for 20 minutes, waiting for a call that never came. "Sarah says everything's fine," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "When's the last time you actually talked to your kids?" The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus couldn't remember. It had been weeks, maybe months, since he'd heard Emma's voice or Tommy's babbling. Always, Sarah had reasons why they couldn't come to the phone. That night, Marcus lay awake in his bunk, staring at the photo of Emma and Tommy taped to the wall. Something was desperately wrong at home, and he was powerless to fix it from 8,000 miles away. After Marcus's departure, Sarah had maintained her act for exactly 2 weeks. The children were fed regular meals, bathed nightly, and tucked into bed with stories. But as the initial excitement of playing house wore off, and the reality of caring for 2 young children set in, Sarah's true nature emerged. It started with small cruelties disguised as discipline. Emma spilled juice on her dress, and instead of helping her change, Sarah made her wear the stained clothing all day as a lesson in being careful. When Tommy cried for his bottle at night, Sarah would let him cry longer and longer, claiming he needed to learn patience. The house rules became stricter and more arbitrary. No talking during meals, no playing with toys until all chores were finished, no going outside without permission. Emma, confused by the sudden changes, tried to be the perfect daughter, but perfection was a moving target in Sarah's world. "Your father isn't here to spoil you anymore," Sarah announced one morning, her voice cold and businesslike. "It's time you learned how real families work. Everyone contributes. Everyone earns their place." Emma was assigned the breakfast dishes, then the lunch dishes, then laundry folding. Each task came with detailed instructions and harsh criticism when they weren't performed exactly right. Tommy, though too young for chores, was expected to stay quiet and out of the way while Emma worked. The first time Sarah raised her hand to Emma was over a broken cup. The 7-year-old had been washing dishes, standing on a chair because she couldn't reach the sink properly. Her small fingers, wet and slippery, had lost their grip. The sound of breaking ceramic brought Sarah running. When she saw the shards scattered across the floor, her face transformed with rage. Clumsy, stupid. The slap across Emma's face was sharp and sudden. "Do you know how much that cup cost? Do you think money grows on trees?" Emma stood frozen, her cheek burning, tears streaming silently. This wasn't how mothers were supposed to behave. This wasn't the woman who'd married her father. "Stop crying," Sarah commanded. "Crying won't fix anything. Clean this mess up, and you'll eat bread and water for dinner. Maybe hunger will help you be more careful." That night, as Emma swept up ceramic pieces with a broom too big for her hands, she wondered if she'd done something to make her new mother stop loving her. Maybe if she tried harder, worked faster, made no mistakes, Sarah would be nice again. What began as isolated incidents of harsh discipline escalated into systematic abuse over the following months. Sarah's treatment of the children became a carefully orchestrated campaign of physical and psychological torment. The morning routine was redesigned around Emma's labor. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, standing on her precarious chair to reach the stove. While Sarah slept late, Emma would prepare oatmeal for herself and a bottle for Tommy, often burning herself on the hot burners because she couldn't see properly over the counter. Meals became battlegrounds of humiliation. Emma was criticized for eating too much, too little, too fast, too slowly. Sometimes Sarah would snatch the food away mid-bite, claiming Emma hadn't earned it through good behavior. Other times, she'd force Emma to eat portions that were too large, then punish her when she couldn't finish. Tommy, though younger, wasn't spared. Sarah would deliberately ignore his cries, letting him soil himself for hours before changing his diaper. She'd put him to bed without dinner if he was too fussy, claiming he needed to learn self-control. The physical abuse was calculated to avoid obvious marks. Sarah never struck their faces after that first slap, instead focusing on areas hidden by clothing. Emma's back and arms bore the evidence of Sarah's belt, while Tommy was subjected to hard pinches and hair pulling that left no lasting marks. But the psychological torment was worse than the physical pain. Sarah convinced Emma that every punishment was deserved, that her father had left because she wasn't good enough, that she was lucky Sarah hadn't abandoned her to foster care. Your real mother died because she was ashamed of what a failure you were, Sarah would hiss during the worst moments. Your father only married me because he couldn't stand taking care of you himself. Emma began to believe it. A child's mind, desperate to make sense of inexplicable cruelty, will often blame itself rather than accept that adults can be monsters. She worked harder, slept less, tried desperately to earn Sarah's approval that would never come. The house became a prison. Emma was forbidden to play outside, to invite friends over, to participate in school activities. When teachers asked about her withdrawn behavior, Sarah would smile sweetly and explain that Emma was shy, that she was working through the grief of losing her mother. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked deeper. Nobody saved her. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez lived in the house next door and had been watching the Thompson family's situation with growing concern. As a retired teacher and grandmother of 6, she had an experienced eye for recognizing children in distress. She first noticed something was wrong when Emma stopped playing in the backyard. The little girl who had once run through the sprinklers and chased butterflies suddenly disappeared from sight. Instead, Elena would glimpse her through windows, always working, always serious, never laughing. The sounds from next door told their own story. Tommy's crying went on for hours without comfort. Dishes clattered at odd hours as tiny hands struggled with adult tasks. Sometimes Elena heard Sarah's voice raised in anger, followed by the distinctive silence of frightened children. One morning, Elena was working in her garden when she saw Emma trying to hang laundry on a line far above her reach. The 7-year-old was dragging a chair from place to place, climbing up to pin each item, then moving the chair again. The wet clothes were heavy in her small hands, and she struggled with every piece. When a towel fell to the dirt, Emma froze in terror. She looked toward the house, then quickly climbed down to retrieve it, scrubbing at the stain with desperate intensity. Elena's grandmother instincts kicked in. She approached the fence that separated their yards, speaking gently so as not to startle the child. "Good morning, Emma. That looks like heavy work for such a young lady." Emma looked up with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm sorry if I'm being too loud," she whispered. "Mama Sarah says I disturb the neighbors." "Oh, honey, you're not disturbing anyone. I was just wondering if you'd like some help." "No, thank you," Emma replied quickly, glancing nervously at the house windows. "I'm supposed to do it myself." Elena noticed the way Emma's thin arms shook with exhaustion, how her clothes hung loose on her frame, how she kept one hand protectively over Tommy, who was crawling nearby in nothing but a soiled diaper. "Where is your mama this morning?" Elena asked carefully. "She's still sleeping. She gets very tired taking care of us, so I help with the morning chores." The casual way Emma explained this arrangement sent chills down Elena's spine. This wasn't help. This was child labor. This wasn't teaching responsibility. This was exploitation. Over the following weeks, Elena documented what she observed. She began keeping a journal, noting the times she heard Tommy crying, the occasions when Emma appeared to be doing housework, the days when neither child seemed to go outside to play. She called the school to ask about Emma's attendance and behavior, claiming to be a concerned neighbor. What she learned troubled her further. Emma had become withdrawn and silent, often falling asleep in class, and had shown up several times with bruises she claimed came from falling downstairs. Elena called Child Protective Services 3 times. Each time she was told they would investigate, but no one ever seemed to visit the house. Each report she filed seemed to disappear into bureaucratic limbo. The system that was supposed to protect children like Emma was failing them completely. The call that changed everything came at 3 hours during Marcus's final month of deployment. Not from Sarah, as he'd expected, but from his unit's family readiness group. Captain Thompson. The voice belonged to Mrs. Patricia Williams, the spouse of his commanding officer. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but we've received some concerning information about your family situation back home." Marcus sat up in his bunk, instantly alert. "What kind of information?" "One of our military family life counselors received a call from a neighbor, someone named Elena Rodriguez. She's been trying to get help for your children through official channels, but nothing seems to be happening." The world tilted on its axis. "What did she say?" "She believes your children are being neglected and abused by your wife. She's documented incidents over several months." "Captain, I have to ask, when did you last speak directly to Emma and Tommy?" Marcus tried to remember. The last conversation had been brief, awkward. Emma had sounded tired and distant. Tommy had been crying in the background, and Sarah had quickly ended the call, claiming he needed a nap. "How long ago was that? 6 weeks? 2 months? Mrs. Williams, I need you to help me get home immediately. Emergency leave, compassionate reassignment, whatever it takes. I need to check on my children. We're already working on it. But Marcus, you need to prepare yourself. If this neighbor's concerns are valid, you might not like what you find." The next 48 hours were the longest of Marcus's military career. Paperwork was expedited, flights were arranged, and fellow soldiers covered his remaining duties with the quiet efficiency of men who understood that some battles were more important than others. During the long flight home, Marcus stared out the window at clouds and ocean, his mind racing with possibilities, each more horrible than the last. He thought about Emma's forced smiles in recent photos, Tommy's thin appearance, Sarah's increasingly elaborate excuses for why the children couldn't talk. The signs had been there all along. He'd ignored them, choosing to trust rather than investigate, prioritizing his military duties over his parental instincts. As the plane descended toward American soil, Marcus made a promise to himself and to his absent children. Whatever he found waiting for him, whatever needed to be done to make things right, he would do it. No mission in Afghanistan had ever mattered more than this moment. The soldier was coming home, and this time he wouldn't be leaving again. Standing in that kitchen, holding his broken children, Marcus understood that his real war was just beginning. This battle wouldn't be fought with weapons and tactics. It would be fought in courtrooms and social services offices, with evidence and testimony, and the unwavering determination of a father who had finally come home. Emma looked up at him, with eyes that held too much knowledge of the world's cruelty, but also with a flicker of hope that had somehow survived the darkness. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you really going to stay this time?" Marcus tightened his embrace around both children, feeling their small hearts beating against his chest. "Forever, sweetheart. Daddy's home forever." Outside, he could hear Sarah's car pulling into the driveway, returning from whatever selfish pursuit had occupied her morning, while her stepchildren struggled in her absence. Soon there would be confrontations and denials, investigations and legal proceedings. But for this moment, in this kitchen where his children had suffered alone for so long, Marcus simply held them and let them feel safe. The healing would take time. Justice would require patience. But love was instantaneous, unlimited, and unbreakable. His children were home in his arms, and nothing in the world would ever separate them again.